The stars once held a detailed blueprint for every human life. We are going to recover a forgotten science, the lost knowledge of the Hellenistic astrologers. This was not the simple horoscopes you see today, but a precise and mathematical art form used by ancient masters. By the end of this, you will understand the original cosmic system that mapped destiny itself. We will uncover how they calculated the length of a person's life and decoded the specific timing of fortune and spirit. What does a truly ancient view of fate reveal about our own choices? This fusion did not happen by accident. It required a specific time and place, a unique historical moment when three great rivers of knowledge finally converged. That moment arrived in the wake of Alexander the Great's astonishing conquests. From around the year 323 before the Common Era until the year 31 before the Common Era, a new world was forged. This was the Hellenistic period, a sprawling network of interconnected kingdoms where Greek became the language of power and learning. And at the very heart of this new world, on the sun-baked coast of Egypt, stood its greatest intellectual engine, the city of Alexandria. Picture Alexandria not just as a city, but as the ancient world's internet, a vast, humming hub where every known piece of information was sought, copied, and debated. Its legendary library was more than a building. It was an ambition to gather all the world's knowledge under one roof. And into this city flowed scholars from every corner of the known world. From the east came Babylonian priest astronomers, masters of meticulous celestial observation. For centuries, they had watched the planets as divine messengers, recording their movements to predict events for kings and empires, seeing omens in the sky for matters of state. From the land of Egypt itself came a different tradition, a deep mystical familiarity with the fixed stars. The Egyptians had divided the belt of the zodiac into 36 decans, each a group of stars that rose just before dawn for a 10-day period, linking time itself to the slow wheeling of the night sky. This was a more personal, cyclical wisdom. And then there were the Greeks, with their relentless drive for system, logic, and philosophy. They asked not just what the gods were signaling, but why. They sought an underlying order, a cosmic architecture that could be understood through geometry and reason. In the crowded lecture halls and quiet scriptoriums of Alexandria, these three streams, Babylonian precision, Egyptian star law, and Greek philosophy, began to swirl together. A key early figure was a man named Berossus, a Babylonian priest who moved to the Greek island of Kos. He did something revolutionary. He wrote about Babylonian astronomy and astrology in Greek, translating an entire celestial tradition for a new audience. For the first time, the detailed mathematical sky maps of Mesopotamia became accessible to thinkers trained in Plato and Aristotle. The result of this collision was something entirely new. It was no longer just about reading omens for the king or marking agricultural cycles. This new system asked a profound and personal question. If the cosmos is an ordered, intelligible whole, and a person is born at a singular moment within that whole, then could that moment, captured in a snapshot of the planets, reveal the blueprint of that individual life? This was the birth of horoscopic astrology, the casting of a personal chart based on the exact time, date, and place of birth. It was the moment astrology turned its gaze from the fate of kingdoms to the potential of the person. And it all began in the vibrant, chaotic, brilliant crossroads that was Alexandria, where the lost knowledge we seek first took its definitive shape. This new question demanded a new tool, one of breathtaking precision and ambition. The Hellenistic astrologers called it the birth chart, or genethliology, the study of one's genesis. Think of it not as a vague horoscope, but as a celestial photograph. It is a map of the entire sky, frozen at the exact moment you drew your first breath. Every planet, every star, positioned with mathematical certainty relative to the horizon of your birthplace. This was the master key to their lost knowledge. To construct this map, they worked with three fundamental layers. The first was the backdrop of the 12 zodiac signs, that familiar belt of constellations through which the sun, moon, and planets appear to travel. But for the Hellenistic astrologer, your sun sign was just one piece of data, not the definition of your character. The second layer was the 7 classical planets themselves. These were the moving points of light, the active players in the cosmic drama. The sun and moon, the great luminaries, then Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Each planet represented a specific force, a type of energy or drive in the human experience, from communication and love to action and discipline. But the third and most crucial layer was a point that is almost entirely forgotten in modern sun sign astrology. They called it the horoscopos, the hour marker. We know it as the ascendant. This is the zodiac sign that was rising on the eastern horizon at your precise moment of birth. Calculating this required knowing the exact time and location, and it was the single most important factor in the entire chart. The ascendant determined the layout of the 12 houses, the sectors of the chart that represent different areas of life, from self and wealth to relationships and career. Without the ascendant, you had a generic sky. With it, you had a personal universe, oriented specifically to you. Building this chart was a formidable task of observation, geometry, and timekeeping. It was a mathematical snapshot of the cosmos, a portrait of the heavens at your beginning. And for these ancient masters, it contained the entire story of what was to come. With that celestial photograph in hand, the Hellenistic astrologer faced their most brilliant innovation. They divided the circle of the sky into 12 unequal slices of life. These are the 12 places, what we now call the houses. Forget the idea of a house as a zodiac sign. These are something far more personal. Imagine your birth chart as a wheel laid over the sky, with you standing at the very center. The line of the eastern horizon, your ascendant, marks the start of the first house. From that point, the wheel is divided into 12 segments, each one representing a fundamental arena of human experience. The first house is the house of self, your body, your appearance, your vital spark, and how you project yourself into the world. The second house governs your resources, your money, your personal values, and what you possess. The seventh house, directly across from the first, is the house of partnerships, marriage, open enemies, and significant one-on-one relationships. And the 10th house at the very top of the chart is the midheaven, representing your career, your public reputation, your life's highest achievement and social standing. Every area of existence had its celestial domain, from siblings and travel in the 3rd house, to secrets and hidden transformations in the 8th. But these houses were not created equal. Their power depended on their relationship to the horizon lines. The 4 key points, the ascendant, the descendant, the midheaven, and the imam's Seelie at the bottom, formed the angles of the chart. The houses anchored to these points, the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th, were called the angular houses. These were considered the most potent and active sectors, where planetary energies manifested most directly and forcefully in the tangible world. A planet in your 10th angular house of career would have a powerful, visible impact on your public life. The houses that followed the angular ones, the 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 11th, were the succedent houses. Think of these as the storehouses, where the momentum generated by the angular houses was consolidated and stabilized, often relating to fixed resources, creativity, shared assets, and long-term hopes. Finally, the remaining houses, the 3rd, 6th, 9th and 12th, were the cadent houses. Cadent means falling, and these were seen as more transitional, mental, and sometimes challenging spaces, governing communication, daily work, higher learning, and solitude. Calculating this whole system was a feat of spherical geometry, requiring an understanding of the observer's latitude and the precise rotation of the Earth. This complexity was the hallmark of true Hellenistic technique, setting it apart from simpler systems. It meant your chart was not just about what was in the sky, but how the entire sky was uniquely oriented around you at your moment of birth, creating a personal landscape of destiny where different life themes would play out with varying intensity. But a planet's placement in a sign was just the beginning of its story. To truly understand its voice in your life's narrative, the Hellenistic astrologers developed a masterful system of evaluation called planetary condition. This was the art of measuring a planet's inherent strength or weakness, its dignity or debility, based on its precise celestial address. Think of it this way. Any planet represents a core energy, like Mars representing drive and assertion. But sending Mars to do a job in its favorite workshop is very different from sending it into a confusing, hostile environment. The results would be worlds apart. This is what condition reveals. At the heart of this system were the 5 essential dignities, a hierarchy of strength. The most powerful was domicile, or rulership. This is when a planet is in the sign it traditionally governs. Mars in Aries is a perfect example. Here, Mars is in its home sign. Its energy of courage, initiative, and raw force operates with natural ease and full power. It's a warrior in his own armory, completely in command. The next level is exaltation. This is a sign where the planet's nature is honored and elevated, like a respected guest of high honor. The Sun, for instance, is exalted in Aries, where its radiant, pioneering spirit is celebrated. Then came the supporting dignities, which added fine layers of nuance. Triplicity grouped the signs by the 4 classical elements, fire, earth, air, and water, and gave certain planets strength in their associated element. Terms were unequal subdivisions of each sign, 5 per sign, where specific planets held a measure of authority. And faces, also called decans, divided each 30-degree sign into 3 10-degree segments, each with a planetary ruler. This created a complex, layered scorecard for every planetary position. But for every dignity, there was a corresponding debility, a weakening condition. The opposite of domicile is detriment, when a planet is in the sign opposite its home. Mars in Taurus, the sign opposite its domicile of Aries, is in its detriment. Here, the swift, direct energy of Mars is frustrated by Taurus's slow, steady, possessive nature. It's like trying to start a sprint in thick mud. The opposite of exaltation is fall, where a planet's nature is seen as uncomfortable or diminished. Venus, exalted in Pisces, is in its fall in Virgo, where its flowing, unifying love can feel overly criticized or bogged down in detail. This system of condition added an immense, almost psychological depth to interpretation. It meant 2 people with Mars in Aries might both be driven. But if one had Mars in its own term and face, its actions would be more focused and effective. If the other had Mars in a debilitated degree, that same drive could manifest as rashness or constant frustration. The condition told you not just what energy was present, but how well that energy could function in the world, whether it was a trusted general or a disorganized militia. This was the precision that turned a sky map into a detailed diagnosis of human potential and challenge. These planetary forces were not vague symbols. They were personalities with portfolios. In the minds of the Hellenistic astrologers, the 7 classical planets were living deities, each possessing a unique set of powers, what they called their dynames. To understand your chart was to understand which of these cosmic officials were managing the different departments of your life, and more importantly, whether they were competent or struggling in their posts. Let's meet the celestial cabinet. First, the great luminaries. The sun was the king, the central authority of the chart. Its core function was the soul itself, your vital essence, your conscious will and sense of identity. It represented father figures, leaders, and anything that radiated authority and central purpose. Where the sun sat in your chart showed where you were meant to shine, to express your core self. The moon, by contrast, was the queen, but her domain was the physical and the public. She governed the body, your instincts, your emotional needs, and the nurturing principle. She also ruled the common people, the ever-changing tides of public mood and daily habit. The moon showed how you felt and reacted, where you sought comfort and security. Then came the 5 wandering stars. Mercury was the swift messenger of the gods. Its functions were intellect, communication, commerce, and cunning. Mercury handled all forms of exchange, from spoken words and written contracts to short journeys and trade. A well-placed Mercury meant a sharp, adaptable mind, while a challenged one could signal misunderstandings or deceptive dealings. Venus was the goddess of harmony and attraction. Her powers were connection, pleasure, beauty, and agreement. She presided over love, art, friendship, and all things that bring enjoyment and social cohesion. Venus showed what and whom you valued, how you related, and where you found grace. Mars was the warrior, pure and simple. His functions were conflict, drive, assertion, and raw energy. Mars ruled over courage, competition, surgery, and any act that required cutting through obstacles. It was the planet of initiative, showing where you fought, where you took risks, and where you burned with desire. Jupiter was the great beneficent, the planet of expansion and good fortune. His powers were growth, abundance, wisdom, and protection. Jupiter governed higher learning, long-distance travel, philosophy, and legitimate success. Where Jupiter resided was where life tended to offer opportunities, generosity, and a bit of lucky grace. Finally, Saturn was the great teacher, though a stern one. His functions were limitation, structure, discipline, and time. Saturn ruled over boundaries, responsibility, hardship, endurance, and mastery through effort. It represented fathers in a different way than the sun, showing authority, restriction, and the lessons that ultimately lead to wisdom and solid achievement. But here is where the system becomes truly dynamic. A planet's condition, that scorecard of dignity and ability we discussed, directly modified how these core functions operated. Jupiter in its domicile of Sagittarius, for instance, would express its benevolent, philosophical nature with ease and optimism. That same Jupiter, if placed in its detriment in Gemini, might still bring opportunities, but they could come through nervous chatter, scattered interests, or a need to intellectualize its faith. Mars exalted in Capricorn could be the disciplined general, channeling drive into ambitious, long-term strategy. Mars in its fall in Cancer, however, might turn that drive inward, leading to defensive anger or fighting over emotional security. The planet told you which celestial official was in charge of a life area. Its condition told you whether that official was a capable administrator in a well-run office, or a frustrated bureaucrat stuck in a collapsing building. Yet a planet acting alone tells only half the story. The true dynamism of a Hellenistic chart came from the conversations happening between these celestial officials. The ancient astrologers called these geometric relationships schemata, meaning configurations or aspects. Think of it as the architecture of influence. When two planets formed a precise mathematical angle in the zodiac wheel, They were said to see each other, to be in dialogue. This connection could be a supportive alliance, a tense debate, or an outright confrontation, fundamentally altering how their combined energies played out in your life. The major aspects were defined by dividing the 360-degree circle by whole numbers. A conjunction, 0 degrees of separation, was the most powerful blend, a fusion of two planetary forces into a single, concentrated point. It could be a brilliant synergy or a chaotic clash, depending on the nature of the planets involved. The sextile, 60 degrees apart, was considered a gentle, harmonious opportunity, a friendly conversation where planets could easily cooperate. The square, a 90-degree angle, created a dynamic tension, a friction that demanded action and often signaled challenges or crises that forced growth. The trine, 120 degrees, was the aspect of effortless flow and natural talent, a harmonious support system where planetary energies reinforced each other with ease. And finally, the opposition, 180 degrees apart, represented polarity, a push-pull of awareness between two ends of a spectrum, often manifesting as external relationships or situations that mirrored an inner conflict. But the Hellenistic masters added a crucial, dynamic layer missing from most modern interpretations. They watched not just for the perfect geometric angle, but for the motion of the planets toward or away from that angle. This was the doctrine of application and separation. If a faster planet was moving through the zodiac to form an exact aspect with a slower one, it was said to be applying. This meant the event, opportunity, or challenge symbolized by that aspect was in motion, approaching, coming into being. It was a promise or a warning taking shape. Once the aspect became exact and the faster planet moved past it, the planets were separating. The energy of the event had been released. Its peak moment had passed, though its consequences would continue to unfold. This turned a static birth chart into a living script. It allowed the astrologer to not only describe your inherent talents and struggles, but to gauge the timing of when certain life themes would activate. Applying square from Mars to your career planet might indicate a period of professional friction about to ignite, demanding your assertive action. A separating trine from Jupiter to your planet of resources could suggest a wave of financial opportunity that had just crested, leaving you to manage its bounty. This attention to celestial motion meant Hellenistic astrology was never just about who you are. It was about when things happen, watching the cosmic clockwork turn to see which conversations between the gods were just beginning, which were reaching their climax, and which were fading into echoes. It was a system that understood destiny not as a fixed sentence, but as an unfolding conversation, with you at the very center of the dialogue. This unfolding celestial conversation was measured by one final, profound tool. Beyond the planets and houses, the Hellenistic astrologers worked with something called the lots, sometimes known later as the Arabian parts. These were not physical bodies, but highly sensitive mathematical points in the chart, calculated from the precise positions of planets and the key angles. They acted like hidden switches, revealing specific themes of destiny that the planets alone could not fully illuminate. The most important of these, the cornerstone of the entire system, was the lot of fortune, or pars fortunae. Its calculation was a beautiful piece of cosmic geometry. For a daytime birth, you would measure the arc from the sun to the moon, and then project that same distance from the ascendant. For a night birth, you reversed it, measuring from the moon to the sun. This created a point that symbolized the integration of your vital spirit, the sun with your physical being, the moon, all oriented through your personal horizon. The lot of fortune represented the body, material life, and the realm of what happens to you. It pointed to your physical well-being, your worldly resources, and the circumstances that seemed to simply arrive at your doorstep, for good or ill. It was the domain of fate in its most tangible sense, the lottery of life into which you were born. But fortune never stood alone. It was always paired with its philosophical counterpart, the lot of spirit, or pars demonis. Calculated in the opposite way, spirit represented the soul, the mind, and the realm of what you choose to do. This was the point of conscious intention, your drive, your willpower, and your capacity to shape the circumstances that fortune provided. This duality was absolutely central. Think of it as the two hands that mold a life. Your lot of fortune is the clay you are given, its quality, its texture, its inherent possibilities and limitations. Your lot of spirit is the skill and vision of the potter, your will to shape that clay into something of meaning. One person might have a strong lot of fortune, indicating a life of relative material ease and good health, but a challenged lot of spirit, suggesting a struggle to find purpose or direction within that comfort. Another might have a difficult fortune point, hinting at early hardships or scarce resources, but a powerful lot of spirit, showing an immense inner drive to overcome and achieve through sheer force of will. The condition of the planet ruling the sign where each lot was placed would then describe the nature of that fortune or that spirit. Seeing these 2 points in a chart gave the ancient astrologer a complete picture of the human condition. The constant interplay between the external world of events and the internal world of choice. It asked the essential question, where does fate end and free will begin? The answer, they believed, was written in the space between these 2 calculated points. The conversation of the stars also kept time. While the aspects showed the immediate celestial dialogues, the Hellenistic astrologers possessed a beautifully simple, yet remarkably precise, system for mapping the rhythm of an entire life. They called it annual profections. This technique answered a fundamental human question: what will this year be about? The answer was found not in complex future transits, but in the elegant, cyclical movement of your own birth chart. The logic was direct and profound. The first house of your chart, ruled by your ascendant, governs yourself, your body, your beginnings. Therefore, your first year of life is ruled by that first house and its planetary lord. When you turn 1 year old, the focus of your life symbolically moves forward. The spotlight shifts from the first house to the second. Your second year of life is then examined through the themes of the second house, your resources and personal values, and is managed by the planet ruling that sign on your second house cusp. This progression continues, year after year, in a steady clockwise march around the wheel of your chart. Each year you profect, or move forward 1 house. Your 25th year of life, for instance, would activate your 10th house of career, reputation, and public achievement. The sign on the cusp of that 10th house, and more importantly, the planet that rules that sign, becomes the central character of your year. This planet is called the Lord of the Year. Think of the Lord of the Year as the appointed manager for that 12-month period. Its condition, its dignity or debility, and the aspects it receives, paint a detailed picture of the year's overarching tone and likely events. Let's make this tangible. Imagine you are turning 25. Your profession lands in your 10th house, which in your chart is the sign of Sagittarius. The ruler of Sagittarius is Jupiter. Therefore, Jupiter becomes your lord of the year. If Jupiter in your birth chart is strong, perhaps in its domicile of Sagittarius or Pisces, and forming harmonious aspects, this could be a year of significant career expansion. You might receive a promotion, embark on higher education that advances your public standing, or gain recognition for your work. The themes are growth, opportunity, and legitimacy, all hallmarks of Jupiter's benevolent nature. But if your Lord of the Year Jupiter is in a difficult condition, perhaps in its detriment in Gemini and squared by Saturn. The year's career themes might still be prominent, but they could involve struggles with communication in a professional setting, scattered focus hindering advancement, or lessons in responsibility that feel restrictive. The profection system provided a clear, annual forecast without needing to track the slow-moving outer planets. It gave a thematic framework, a chapter title for each year of your life story, while the condition of the Lord of the Year wrote the specific plot details. After 12 years, the cycle completes one full revolution of your chart, and on your 13th birthday, the profection returns to your first house, beginning the cycle anew, but now with the wisdom and accumulated experience of the first 12-year journey. It was a masterful way to see life not as a random series of events, but as a destined, cyclical unfolding of potential, where each year had its own celestial governor, waiting to reveal its unique chapter in the grand narrative written in your stars. Yet the annual profection was only the first layer of timing. The pinnacle of their predictive art was a breathtakingly intricate system known as zodiacal releasing. This technique, preserved in the writings of the 2nd century astrologer Vettius Valens, did not simply look at years. It mapped the very architecture of a lifetime. It revealed the hidden seasons of your destiny. At its heart were the two great lots, fortune and spirit. Each lot acted as a unique launching pad, a seed point from which your fate would unfold in structured, repeating cycles. The system worked by calculating a sequence of periods, sub-periods, and sub-sub-periods, all flowing from the zodiac sign that contained your lot. Imagine your life as a grand, multi-volume biography. Zodiacal releasing shows you how that biography is organized. The major periods are like the volumes themselves, covering many years and defining a broad theme, such as a decade focused on career building or family life. These periods are determined by the order of the zodiac signs, starting from the sign of your lot. Each sign, with its ruling planet, governs one of these long chapters. So if your lot of spirit is in Leo, your first life period is ruled by Leo and its king, the Sun. This might be a chapter fundamentally about finding your creative identity, stepping into a leadership role, or learning to express your core self with confidence. The quality of that entire epoch is colored by the Sun's condition in your birth chart. But within each volume are chapters, the sub-periods. These break the major period into smaller segments, each ruled by the next sign in the zodiacal sequence. If your Leo period brings a solar theme of self-expression, a sub-period in the following sign, Virgo, would bring Mercury's influence to the forefront. During those months or years, the focus might shift to refining your craft, attending to practical details, or communicating your creative work with precision. The challenges or ease of that sub-period would again depend on Mercury's strength and aspects in your natal chart. And within each chapter are the paragraphs, the sub-sub-periods. These are the brief, often monthly, waves of influence that add the finest texture to your experience. They represent the day-to-day rhythm within the larger themes. It is here that the predictive power becomes almost startling in its specificity. You could be in a long Jupiter-ruled period of general expansion, but during a sub-sub-period ruled by Mars, you might experience a sudden burst of competitive energy, a conflict that demands action, or a surgical decision that cuts through a lingering problem. The system creates a cascading hierarchy of time. A strong, well-placed ruler at the period level sets a generally fortunate tone for many years, like a prosperous reign. Even a difficult sub-period within that reign would be a manageable challenge, a temporary setback in an otherwise favorable era. Conversely, a period ruled by a debilitated planet, like Saturn in its fall, establishes a baseline of hardship or necessary restriction. The bright sub-periods within that difficult era would feel like respites, moments of relief or minor success within a larger narrative of struggle and consolidation. This was not fortune-telling, it was fate mapping. Zodiacal, releasing from the lot of spirit, showed the active seasons of your will and purpose. Releasing from the lot of fortune revealed the passive seasons of your material circumstances and physical life. By comparing the two, an astrologer could see when your inner drive, your spirit, was aligned with supportive external conditions, your fortune, creating windows of profound opportunity and ease. They could also see when your will was pushing against a tide of difficult circumstances, advising patience and inner work. This layered technique represents the most sophisticated achievement of the Hellenistic mind, a mathematical poetry that charted the long arcs of a human life as clearly as the stars charted their paths across the night sky. All this intricate timing leads to astrology's most profound and solemn calculation. The Hellenistic masters did not shy away from life's ultimate horizon. They developed a meticulous technique to assess the foundational vitality of a person, a method to calculate the potential length of life itself. This was not morbid fortune-telling, but the highest expression of their art, an attempt to measure the core strength of the life force given at birth. Astrologers like Dorotheus of Sidon and Claudius Ptolemy wrote carefully about this procedure, treating it with the gravity of a sacred geometry. The entire process revolved around identifying two critical points in the birth chart. The first was the high leg, or a fetter, the giver of life. This was not a planet, but a sensitive point, a wellspring of vitality. The candidate for this role was typically one of the three great lights, the sun, the moon, or the ascendant. Which one became the official high leg depended on a strict set of rules involving the time of day, the sect of the chart, and their placement in specific powerful houses. Finding the true high leg was the first, crucial step, for it held the seed of your vital endurance. Once the high leg was identified, the search began for its guardian, the alkecodon, or alchicodon. This was always a planet, the giver of years. The alkecodon was the planet that ruled the sign the high leg was placed in, or the planet that ruled the sign on the boundary of the house containing the high leg. This planetary lord held the key to a numerical range. The condition of this alkecodon planet, its score of essential dignity or debility, determined how many years of basic vitality it could bestow upon the high leg, and by extension, the native. A planet in its own domicile and exaltation, for example, might grant its full measure of years, a number associated with that planet's nature. Jupiter, the great benefic, was associated with the largest numbers, like 79 or 80. Mars or Saturn, the more challenging planets, granted smaller ranges. A planet in a mixed or weak condition would grant only a fraction of its potential years, perhaps just the minimum of its range. The final step was a judgment, comparing the condition of the alkecodon with the condition of the high leg itself. If both were strong, the native could expect to live through the primary period indicated by the alkecodon. If the high leg was besieged by malefic planets or otherwise afflicted, even a strong alkecodon's promise might be cut short. The result was not a single date, but a range, a major period of life where the core vitality was strongest. Surviving into the next period governed by a different alkecodon was considered a sign of exceptional fortune or medical intervention. To the modern mind, this seems stark. But for the Hellenistic astrologer, this calculation was the bedrock. It established the scale of the life they were interpreting. Knowing the potential length of the primary life period framed every other prediction. It told them whether the career success shown in the 10th house would unfold over a long, prosperous reign or a brief, brilliant flash. It contextualized the marriage promised in the 7th house, revealing whether it was a youthful union or a companionship of later years. This technique was never about predicting a precise death. It was a diagnostic of the life force itself, a way to gauge the stamina of the soul's vehicle, and to understand the major chapters in which the story of that soul would be told. It asked and attempted to answer the most serious question the stars could pose: how long is the stage upon which your destiny will perform? But the planets moved against a grander, fixed tapestry. Beyond the wandering lights of the 7 classical planets, the Hellenistic astrologers' gaze extended to the true immortals of the night, the fixed stars. These were the brilliant, unmoving points that formed the constellations, and they were seen as the ultimate backdrop of destiny, adding profound layers of mythic color and fateful detail to the personal chart. To understand a life, you had to connect it to this eternal, storytelling sky. They paid particular attention to a handful of the brightest, most potent stars, each with its own legendary reputation. There was Regulus, the heart of the lion in Leo, known as the Royal Star. A planet conjoining Regulus was infused with kingly potential, suggesting leadership, honor, and a drive for greatness, though also the perils of pride. Then there was Spica, the golden ear of wheat in Virgo's hand, considered the most beneficent of all stars. Contact with Spica promised artistic talent, pure success, and a touch of celestial grace upon the matters of the house it touched. But the sky held darkness as well. They knew Algol in the constellation of Perseus as the demon star. This was the blinking eye of the Gorgon Medusa, a profoundly malefic influence. A planet aligned with Algol could indicate violence, sudden loss, or a terrifying transformative power, a star of severing and crisis. These were not vague omens. Their integration was precise, achieved through a technique called the paranetolonta. This involved noting which bright stars and constellations were rising, culminating, or setting at the exact same moment. A specific degree of the zodiac was on the horizon. Imagine your ascendant is at 15 degrees of Taurus. The Hellenistic astrologer would consult his star catalogue to see that as that degree rose, the entire constellation of Orion might be standing on the eastern horizon, its belt stars glittering. This meant the myths and qualities of Orion, the mighty hunter, were woven directly into your presentation of self. Your first house, your identity, carried the imprint of that celestial archetype. This system created a breathtaking synthesis. Your chart was no longer just a diagram of planetary positions. It was a living portrait set within the entire mythic theater of the cosmos. The slow precession of the equinoxes meant these star alignments shifted over millennia, which is why much of this detailed star lore faded from common practice. But for the original practitioners, this knowledge connected every individual life to the oldest stories humanity told while looking up, making your destiny a unique verse in an epic poem written in light. The next time you look at a clear night sky, remember you are not just seeing random dots. You are looking at the original cast of characters, the fixed backdrop against which every personal drama, mapped by the wandering planets, was once seen to unfold. This vast cosmic system was not merely a mirror for passive reflection. For the Hellenistic astrologer, the stars were also a compass for active navigation. Beyond describing a life or predicting its seasons, they perfected the art of choosing the right moment to begin anything of importance. This branch was called Katach, or electional astrology, the science of inception. It transformed astrology from a predictive script into a strategic tool for shaping destiny. The principle was elegantly practical. If the birth chart shows the inherent qualities of a life, then a chart cast for the moment you begin a significant action reveals the qualities of that endeavor's life. Whether launching a ship, signing a contract, laying a foundation stone, or even embarking on a journey. The celestial weather at that exact minute would permeate the venture for its entire duration. An astrologer consulted for an election would not look at your natal chart. Instead, they would construct a new chart, a geniture for the proposed event itself. Their analysis was fiercely tactical. They sought to place the most beneficial planets, Jupiter and Venus, as the rulers of the key angles of this event chart, especially the 1st and 10th houses, ensuring the project began with favor, strength, and good reputation. They would try to have the moon, symbolizing the public and the physical matter of the event, applying to a conjunction or supportive aspect with one of these benefics, channeling growth and harmony into the undertaking. Crucially, they worked to avoid malefic influences at all costs. They would ensure that Mars or Saturn, the planets of conflict and restriction, were not positioned as the lords of the event's pivotal houses. A voyage begun under a chart where Mars ruled the first house of the journey itself might promise storms, arguments among the crew, or mechanical failures. A marriage commenced under a Saturn-ruled 7th house could embed themes of coldness, duty, or delay into the very fabric of the union. The art was in finding a window where the cosmic forces aligned in support of the specific goal. For starting a business, you would want Jupiter strong in the 2nd house of resources or the 10th house of public standing. For a medical procedure, you would need the moon, governing the body, free from affliction, and perhaps supported by a well-placed Mercury, the planet of skilled hands. This was astrology as applied engineering, a way to lay the cornerstone of any new life chapter under the most supportive sky possible. It acknowledged that while we cannot change our birth chart, we have profound agency in choosing the celestial climate for our most important beginning. This proactive spirit also fueled another related practice, horary astrology. Here, the chart was cast not for a chosen future moment, but for the precise instant a pressing question crystallized in the mind of the quant. The moment you truly ask, "Will I get this job?" or "Where is my lost ring?" was seen as a birth chart for the question itself. The planets' positions at that second were believed to hold the answer, encoded in a symbolic language of houses and aspects. Both electional and horary astrology reveal a core Hellenistic belief. The cosmos is in constant, responsive conversation. It is not a distant movie screen showing a fixed story, but a living environment. You could wait for the right weather to sail, or you could ask the sky a direct question and trust it to answer. This turns the lost knowledge from a fascinating history into a deeply relevant philosophy. The universe is not just speaking about our lives, it is listening. This intimate conversation between the cosmos and the body was formalized into a precise medical science. The Hellenistic astrologers saw the human form as a perfect reflection of the heavens, a microcosm of the macrocosm. This principle was known as melethesia, the zodiacal man. In this system, each of the 12 signs governed a specific part of the physical body, mapping the celestial wheel directly onto our anatomy. The journey began at the top, with Aries ruling the head and face, the seat of identity and initiative. Taurus governed the neck and throat, the channels of voice and sustenance. The rulership continued down the body in order, with Gemini for the shoulders, arms, and lungs, Cancer for the chest and stomach, Leo for the heart and spine, all the way down to Pisces, which presided over the feet and the lymphatic system. This was not a vague metaphor, but a practical diagnostic tool. If you were suffering from a persistent stomach ailment, an astrologer would look immediately to the sign of Cancer in your birth chart. They would examine the condition of the moon, Cancer's ruler, and any planets positioned within Cancer. A debilitated moon or a challenging planet like Saturn in that sign could indicate a constitutional weakness or a chronic issue in that very area. But the diagnosis went deeper, into the very fluids of life. The planets were linked to the four humors, the foundational substances of ancient medicine. The Sun and Mars were hot and dry, associated with yellow bile, governing anger, inflammation, and feverish conditions. The Moon and Venus were cold and moist, linked to phlegm, influencing calmness, but also congestion and sluggishness. Jupiter was hot and moist, ruling the sanguine humor of blood, responsible for growth, optimism, and a strong life force. Saturn, cold and dry, governed black bile, the melancholic humor tied to bones, joints, depression, and chronic, wasting diseases. Health was seen as a perfect balance of these cosmic humors, and illness was a dangerous imbalance. Your natal chart revealed your inherent humoral temperament. A person with a strong Jupiter and Sun might have a dominant sanguine and choleric nature, prone to robust health, but also to excess and heated arguments. Someone with a prominent Saturn and Moon might lean toward a phlegmatic and melancholic constitution, requiring careful management of damp, cold conditions and low moods. This knowledge directly informed treatment. An astrologer physician would not just prescribe an herb, they would time its administration. Surgery, especially, was governed by the Moon. You would never perform a procedure on a part of the body when the Moon was transiting through its ruling sign, as it was believed to draw the vital fluids to that area, increasing the risk of hemorrhage. Instead, you would wait for the Moon to be in a barren, dry sign like Virgo or Capricorn, and preferably applying to a harmonious aspect with Saturn, which promoted dryness, restriction, and clean healing. Even the gathering of medicinal herbs was an astrological act, done under a specific planetary hour when the plant's celestial counterpart was strongest. This was a holistic view that seems alien to us now, where a headache was not just a localized pain, but a potential message from Aries, influenced by the condition of Mars and the flow of yellow bile in the body. It wove the individual into the fabric of the universe, making every ache and every cure a celestial event. The question of free will hung over this entire celestial edifice. If the stars map our lives with such precision, where does our choice enter the picture? The Hellenistic world was alive with philosophical debate on this very issue, and the astrologers were keenly aware of it. The Stoics, like the famous Seneca, taught a philosophy of accepting one's fate with calm dignity. For them, the universe was a rational, determined order, and true freedom came from willingly aligning your will with its inevitable flow. To know your chart was to understand your role in the great play of the cosmos, and to play it well. On the opposite side were the Epicureans, who emphasized chance and the random swerve of atoms. They might have seen astrology as a comforting but ultimately false structure imposed on a chaotic universe, but the astrologers themselves often operated from a more nuanced, middle Platonic perspective, which sought a bridge between these extremes. This worldview introduced key concepts that shaped their practice. There was Hymarmene, the inescapable thread of what is fated. This was the fixed backdrop, the conditions of your birth, your inherent temperament, and the major timing cycles revealed by techniques like zodiacal releasing. You could not choose your parents, your innate talents, or the era you were born into. This was the given clay. But then there was pronoia, or providence, the divine reason and order within the cosmos itself. Astrology was the study of this pronoia, the attempt to read the rational patterns of the universe. By understanding these patterns, you were not submitting to blind fate, you were gaining wisdom. And finally there was titch, fortune or chance, the unpredictable element that seemed to operate within the fated framework. This is where the human experience lived, in the interplay between the fixed and the fluid. The brilliance of the system is that it built this philosophy directly into the technical machinery. Remember the two great lots, fortune and spirit. The lot of fortune represented your titch, the circumstances and material lot you were given, the realm of what happens to you. The lot of spirit represented your conscious intention, your drive, your capacity for pranaya, the realm of what you choose to do with what happens. This duality was the practical answer to the philosophical debate. Your chart did not show a single locked destiny. It showed a landscape of potentials and challenges. A difficult square aspect between Mars and Saturn in your chart did not mean you were fated to have a violent argument with an authority figure on a specific Tuesday. It meant you had an inherent tension between your drive and the structures around you. You might experience that tension as a series of frustrating obstacles at work, pushing you to develop disciplined strategy, Mars in Saturn's realm. Or you might internalize it as a struggle with self-imposed limits, Saturn crushing Mars's initiative. The aspect described the weather pattern, but you decided how to build your house within it. The condition of the planets told you whether the tools you had for navigation were sharp or dull, but you still had to steer the ship. This is why the predictive techniques focused on timing windows, not single events. They indicated when certain themes would become active, when the cosmic weather would shift. A profection to your seventh house of partnership signaled a year where relationships would be a central focus. Whether that manifested as a harmonious marriage or a difficult legal dispute depended on the condition of that year's ruler and, crucially, the choices you made within that activated arena. The lost knowledge of the Hellenistic astrologers, therefore, was not a prison of stars. It was a sophisticated language for mapping the conversation between destiny and agency. It provided the roadmap, noting the steep mountains and the flowing rivers, but it was always the individual, the traveler holding the map, who decided which path to take, how quickly to walk, and what meaning to find in the journey. Our understanding of this entire system owes an immense debt to one man, a second-century practitioner who decided to write it all down. Vettius Valens was not a philosopher in a quiet library, but a working astrologer from the bustling city of Antioch, a man who used these techniques daily for real clients with real questions. Around the year 150 of the Common Era, he began compiling his life's work into a massive, sprawling text he called the Anthologies. This is not a clean, theoretical textbook. It is a messy, personal, and breathtakingly practical treasure trove. Think of it as the surviving field notes of a master craftsman, filled with complex calculations, example birth charts of his clients, detailed explanations of timing techniques like zodiacal releasing, and even his own philosophical musings and frustrations. Valens gives us the unvarnished view. He shows us the system in motion, with all its glorious complexity and occasional contradictions. We see him wrestling with difficult charts, adjusting methods, and passing on rules of thumb learned from hard experience. One remarkable story from the Anthologies reveals just how applied this art could be. Valens describes being consulted about a runaway slave. Instead of vague predictions, he cast a specific chart for the moment the question was asked. Analyzing the positions, he pinpointed the direction the slave had fled, described the hiding place near water and reeds, and even suggested the slave would be found through a woman associated with the household. This was astrology as investigative tool, a precise language used to navigate a concrete, urgent problem. The Anthologies survive today in later Byzantine manuscripts, pages filled with Greek text, numerical tables, and hand-drawn zodiac wheels. These fragile pages are our most direct bridge back to the practice itself. Through Valens's detailed, sometimes exasperated voice, we hear the calculations being made, the judgments being formed, and the lost knowledge breathing again. He ensures this is not just a theoretical reconstruction, but a recovered manual from a working astrologer's desk, stained with ink and the urgency of daily life. While Vettius Valens gave us the messy workshop, another mind was building a pristine museum for the stars. In the same 2nd century, but in the intellectual capital of Alexandria, the scholar Claudius Ptolemy approached the celestial art from the opposite direction. Ptolemy was a titan of systematic thought, a master of astronomy, geography, and mathematics. His great work on astrology, the Tetrabiblos, meaning 4 books, was not a collection of case studies, but a deliberate philosophical effort to place the entire practice on a firm, rational foundation. Where Valens showed us how, Ptolemy set out to explain why. His starting point was the physics of his time. Ptolemy argued that the influence of the stars was not magical, but a natural and continuous force, much like the sun's heat or the moon's pull on the tides. He linked this celestial causality directly to the theory of the 4 elements that made up all of creation: fire, earth, air, and water. Each zodiac sign, he explained, partook of a specific elemental quality: hot, cold, dry, or moist. The planets, too, possessed their own elemental temperaments. A planet moving through a sign of a compatible nature would express its power harmoniously, while one in a clashing sign would struggle. This was his scientific rationale for the old system of planetary dignities. He provided a cause for the effects everyone observed. This intellectual framework was a masterstroke. By grounding astrology in natural philosophy, Ptolemy made it respectable, even necessary, for any educated person seeking to understand the interconnected cosmos. For over a millennium, his Tetrabiblos was the definitive textbook, studied by scholars, physicians, and theologians alike. It gave astrology a seat at the table of legitimate sciences. But this drive for a clean, logical system came with a cost. In his effort to present a unified theory, Ptolemy simplified or quietly omitted many of the complex, traditional techniques that practitioners like Valens relied on daily. The intricate system of the lots, the detailed calculations of the high leg and alkecodon for length of life, the precise methods of zodiacal releasing, these messy but powerful tools received little attention in his orderly 4 books. Ptolemy's work preserved the core principles and made them intellectually defensible, but in doing so it began a slow process of separation. The more practical, predictive, and frankly more fatalistic techniques of the earlier tradition became specialist knowledge, while Ptolemy's more philosophical, temperament-focused astrology became the public face of the art. His influence was a double-edged sword, granting centuries of legitimacy, while also inadvertently burying layers of the very lost knowledge we are now trying to recover. The brilliant synthesis forged in Alexandria did not remain intact. A great transmission gap opened, and the unified body of knowledge began to fracture. This fragmentation started with the slow unraveling of the world that created it. The Western Roman Empire, which had inherited and spread much of this Hellenistic culture, collapsed under immense pressure in the 5th century. The political and economic order that supported libraries, schools, and traveling scholars dissolved into chaos and local survival. In this new world, the intricate celestial science was a luxury few could afford or protect. A more profound shift was occurring in the realm of belief. The rise of Christianity as the dominant spiritual force brought a deep suspicion of practices deemed pagan. While many church fathers accepted a kind of natural astrology, the detailed, predictive art of genethliology was often condemned as a form of forbidden divination, an attempt to usurp God's providence with deterministic star law. This theological opposition was not just theoretical. In the year 529, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian ordered the closure of the Neoplatonic Academy in Athens, the last great bastion of classical pagan philosophy. With its doors shut, a vital stream of the philosophical framework that supported astrology was dammed. The workshops where this knowledge was practiced and refined grew silent across the Latin West. But the story does not end there. The light did not go out, it moved east. While Europe entered what later scholars would call its Dark Ages, the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, held on. In its capital of Constantinople, Greek-speaking scribes and scholars continued to copy and preserve ancient texts, including the works of Ptolemy and even fragments of practitioners like Vettius Valens. These manuscripts were treasures in a shrinking world. Then came a pivotal moment in history, the explosive rise of the Islamic caliphates. As Arab armies conquered vast territories from Persia to Spain, they did not destroy the knowledge they found, they became its passionate custodians. During the Islamic Golden Age, centered in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, a monumental translation project began. Teams of scholars worked tirelessly to render Greek philosophical and scientific texts, including every astrological work they could find, into Arabic. Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos became the Kitab al-Mawalid. The techniques of Dorotheus and Vettius Valens were studied, commented on, and expanded by brilliant minds like al-Biruni and Abu Mashar. This Arabic tradition didn't just preserve, it innovated, adding new layers of interpretation and technique. This eastward journey is the crucial thread that kept the knowledge alive. But it also created the condition for it to become lost to its original cultural home. Over the centuries in Europe, the original Greek texts themselves often crumbled to dust, or were lost to fire and neglect. What survived in the West were often second or third-hand versions, Latin translations made from the Arabic translations of the Greek originals. Names were garbled, techniques were sometimes misunderstood, and the rich, interconnected system began to resemble a game of telephone played across 1,000 years. When this filtered knowledge finally trickled back into medieval Europe through centers of learning in places like Toledo, Spain, it was a hybrid, a reflection of a reflection. The profound connection to the original Hellenistic philosophical debates, the full technical scope of the lots and zodiacal releasing, the precise medical applications, much of this depth was obscured, buried under layers of translation and cultural adaptation. So when we speak of the lost knowledge of the Hellenistic astrologers, we are not talking about something that vanished completely. We are talking about a magnificent tapestry that was torn into sections. Some pieces were hidden in plain sight within later traditions. Others were filed away in forgotten manuscripts, waiting for a key to piece the original pattern back together. The recovery begins by tracing that journey east and back again, following the path of the texts that carried the stars' secrets through the long night between empires. This journey through languages and empires acted as a great filter, subtly reshaping the knowledge itself. As the stars spoke Greek in Alexandria, then Persian in Baghdad, and finally Latin in the monasteries of Europe, their message was inevitably translated, not just in words, but in thought. The Persian and Arabic scholars who became the new gatekeepers of this science were intellectual giants, men like Mashallah ibn Athari and Abu Mashar, known in the West as Al-Bimasar. Their role was heroic. They saved the texts from oblivion. They commented on them, expanded them, and integrated them with their own rich astronomical traditions. But in doing so, they began to refract the light of the original system through a new cultural lens. One of the most significant shifts was a change in emphasis. The intricate Hellenistic focus on the individual's life blueprint, the detailed assessment of planetary condition as a measure of competence, and the profound timing techniques like zodiacal releasing, while still present, often became secondary. The Arabic tradition placed greater weight on mundane astrology, predicting events for nations and rulers, and on interrogations, answering specific yes or no questions through horary charts. This was a practical adaptation for a new world of caliphs and empires. Furthermore, these later traditions began to introduce concepts utterly foreign to the original seven-planet cosmos. Centuries later, with the discovery of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, Western astrologers eagerly layered these new celestial bodies onto the existing framework. But this created a philosophical dissonance. The elegant, complete system of the Hellenistic world, with its 7 planets mirroring the 7 known metals and the 7 days of the week, was a closed, symbolic circuit. Adding new planets, while insightful in a modern context, would have been incomprehensible to an astrologer from Antioch or Alexandria. It is like adding new primary colors to an ancient painter's carefully balanced palette. The entire harmony of the original artwork changes. Perhaps the deepest loss was contextual. The original techniques were born from a specific philosophical soup, a blend of Stoic acceptance, Platonic idealism, and Aristotelian causality. When these techniques were extracted and passed down through Persian poetic symbolism, and later medieval Christian moralism, that underlying why often faded. A technique for calculating the length of life could become a frightening oracle, rather than a diagnostic of vital strength. The lot of spirit, that point of conscious will, could lose its philosophical pairing with fortune, reducing a profound duality to just another point in the chart. The transmission flowchart is not a straight line. It is a tree with many branches. The Greek root fed the Arabic trunk, which then branched into Latin, Persian, and Hebrew limbs. Each branch grew leaves unique to its environment, while the core structure of the root, its deepest philosophical nutrients, remained hidden underground. So when this knowledge finally re-entered Renaissance Europe, it was a hybrid. Scholars marveled at the celestial science recovered from the Arabs, but they were often looking at a magnificent, refracted image of the original. The most intricate gears of the Hellenistic clockwork, the ones that mapped the long arcs of a destiny, were still buried in untranslated Greek manuscripts or condensed into cryptic footnotes in Arabic commentaries. This is the heart of the lost layer, not a complete disappearance, but a profound obscuring. The skeleton of astrology survived the medieval filter, but much of its original muscle and soul, its nuanced purpose and its most precise predictive tools, were left behind in the shadows of history, waiting for a later age to piece the full portrait back together. Buried within those untranslated Greek manuscripts lay the original blueprint. For centuries, the full vision of Hellenistic astrology remained locked away, accessible only to a handful of classical scholars who saw it as a historical curiosity, not a living practice. The turning point began not with astrologers, but with historians of religion and science. In the early 20th century, a Belgian scholar named Frans Cumont dedicated his life to studying the mystery religions of the Roman Empire. His meticulous work, sifting through inscriptions and fragmented texts, brought to light the profound role astrology played in the ancient worldview. He helped catalogue the surviving evidence, proving this was not a marginal superstition, but a central pillar of ancient thought. Yet the technical manuals themselves, the how-to guides of the art, remained largely unread in their original, complex Greek. The true keys were still missing. Then, in the 1990s, a project began that would change everything. It was called Project Hindsight, led by a classicist and astrologer named Robert Schmidt. Along with colleagues like Robert Hand, this small team embarked on a monumental task. They would go back to the very beginning, to the oldest surviving Greek and Latin astrological texts, and translate them anew. But this was not a simple literary translation. They were translating for meaning, for technical precision. Their goal was to recover the original intent behind every obscure term, every mathematical procedure. Words like kleros for lot, or horoscopos for ascendant, carried specific, loaded meanings that had been softened or lost over a millennium of copying and cultural drift. Schmidt and his team had to rebuild the lexicon from the ground up, often spending pages of commentary, just to define a single ancient concept correctly. It was like reconstructing an extinct language of engineering from a set of old, partially burned schematics. This painstaking work, published in a series of plain, dense volumes, was a revelation. For the first time in over 1,000 years, modern practitioners could read Vettius Valens or Paulus Alexandrinus not as filtered through Arabic or Renaissance Latin, but directly. They could see the system in its own words, the complex architecture of zodiacal releasing, the precise steps for finding the high leg, the original logic behind the planetary conditions. It all emerged from the shadows. A new generation of astrologers and historians suddenly had access to the source code. This led to a quiet revolution. Books like Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune, by Chris Brennan, began to synthesize this recovered knowledge, presenting the original system in a clear, comprehensive way for a contemporary audience. The lost knowledge was no longer a myth. It was a set of instructions, now in English, waiting to be understood and perhaps used again. This recovery reconnected a broken lineage, allowing us to finally see the original design of that celestial clockwork, not through the glass of later traditions, but through the eyes of the masters who first built it. To grasp what was truly lost, we need to place the two systems side by side. On one side stands modern psychological astrology, the form most people know today. It focuses primarily on the sun sign as the core of personality. Its language is about inner development, archetypes, and understanding your psyche. It is often non-predictive, a tool for self-reflection rather than forecasting specific events. The houses are often seen as psychological arenas, and the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, play starring roles in describing generational shifts and deep subconscious forces. It asks, who are you and how can you grow? Now look to the other side, to the recovered Hellenistic framework. Here, the sun sign is merely one important planet among several. The absolute ruler of the chart is the ascendant, the precise degree rising at your birth. This system is unabashedly predictive. It was designed to answer concrete, worldly questions. Will I be wealthy? What career path is shown? When will I marry? Is my health strong? Its framework is more deterministic, mapping out the potential events and conditions of a life with startling specificity. The houses are not just psychological spaces. They are literal departments of life, from your physical body and money to your enemies and children. Planetary condition, that scorecard of strength and weakness, is central, telling you not just that you have Mars energy, but whether that energy functions as a capable general or a reckless soldier. The difference becomes stark in practice. Take the theme of career. A modern psychological interpretation might discuss your 10th house as an area where you seek public recognition and authority, perhaps exploring your relationship with father figures or your need to structure your ambitions. It might note Neptune there and speak of visionary but possibly confused career goals, inviting you to integrate spirituality with your work. A Hellenistic interpretation of the same chart would begin differently. It would first identify the ruler of the 10th house. Let us say it is Jupiter, It would then immediately assess Jupiter's condition. Is it in its domicile, strong and capable? Or is it in its fall, debilitated and struggling? It would note if Jupiter is making applying aspects to beneficial or malefic planets, indicating upcoming opportunities or challenges. It would then use annual profections to see which year of your life activates that 10th house sector, and perhaps even use zodiacal, releasing from the lot of spirit, to identify the multi-year period when career themes are destined to be most prominent. The prediction is not vague. It might state during your 37th year, when the profection activates your 10th house, and with its ruler Jupiter strong, you can expect a major career advancement, likely involving long-distance travel or higher education. The focus is on the tangible event, not just the inner feeling. What was lost, then, is not just a list of techniques like the lots or profections. It was an entire orientation toward the cosmos. Modern astrology often asks the stars to illuminate our inner world. The Hellenistic astrologer asked the stars to describe the outer world we would navigate. They saw the chart not as a mirror for the soul, but as a map for the journey, complete with forecasts for the terrain ahead. This shift from mapping destiny to exploring psychology represents the deepest divide between the ancient art and its modern descendant. One seeks to understand the play of fate, the other seeks to understand the player. The true power of this system reveals itself only in synthesis. Let us reconstruct a reading, stepping into the sandals of a Hellenistic astrologer to examine a life they would have known well, that of Alexander the Great. We will use a chart cast for his reported birth time in the city of Pella, just before dawn on July 20th, 356 before the Common Era. The visual here shows a wheel divided into 12 segments, the planets placed within them. Our first and most critical step is to find the ruler of the chart. We look to the eastern horizon, the ascendant. At this moment, the sign of Leo is rising. Therefore, the chart's master, its absolute authority, is the Sun, the planetary ruler of Leo. This immediately frames the entire life. The Sun, representing the soul, kingship, and radiant authority, is the lord of Alexander's identity and body. Where is this kingly Sun placed? It resides in the sign of Cancer in the 12th house. This is a fascinating mix. The Sun in Cancer is in its fall, a position of debility. Cancer is a sign of home, family, and protective emotions, not the natural domain of a solar king. Furthermore, the 12th house is a cadent, hidden house of solitude, secrets, and undoing. At first glance, this seems contradictory for a world conqueror. But condition is everything. The Sun, though in its fall, is also in one of its own terms, a minor dignity granting it a measure of resourcefulness. More importantly, we look to its aspects. The Sun applies to a trine with Jupiter, the great benefic, which is exalted in Cancer. This is a tremendous mitigating factor. The debilitated king receives direct, harmonious support from the most fortunate planet, which is itself in a position of supreme honor. The interpretation begins to form. Alexander's core identity, his solar drive, was not rooted in a stable homeland. It operated from a place of deep, almost hidden emotional need, a drive to create a new universal family through conquest, supported by phenomenal luck and expansive vision. Next, we calculate the lot of fortune to understand his material fate. For this dawn birth, we measure from the Sun to the Moon, then project that arc from the ascendant. This places fortune in the bold, pioneering sign of Aries, in the 9th house of long journeys, foreign cultures, and higher philosophy. The ruler of Aries is Mars. Where is Mars? It is in Taurus, in the 10th house of career and public standing, but it is in its detriment. Mars, the warrior, is in the slow, steady sign of the bull. This suggests his legendary military fortune, his Aries-like initiative, was achieved through immense, stubborn perseverance, a grinding force rather than merely swift raids. His material destiny was tied to relentless campaigning in foreign lands. Now let us apply a timing technique. Alexander died in Babylon at the age of 32. What did his 33rd year look like through annual profections? At age 32, he profected to his 33rd house. Since the cycle repeats every 12 years, 32 is 8 full cycles plus 8 more houses. We count 8 houses from his Leo ascendant. This brings us to the sign of Pisces, his 8th house of death, transformation, and other people's resources. The ruler of Pisces is Jupiter. We already know Jupiter is exalted, a powerful benefic. However, Jupiter in this chart is also the ruler of the 8th house of death. During this year, the exalted planet of expansion became the lord of the death house. Furthermore, Jupiter is placed in the 12th house of confinement and hidden enemies. The lord of the year for his 33rd year, therefore, was a supremely strong Jupiter, but one governing the themes of death from a place of seclusion and secrecy. A Hellenistic astrologer, seeing this profection, would not predict a specific death date, but would warn that the year carried a profound, perhaps paradoxical ending, where great fortune and expansive plans could culminate in a sudden, transformative crisis away from home. Synthesizing just these few pieces, the sun ruling from fall yet aided by an exalted Jupiter, fortune in Aries ruled by a detriment, Mars in the career house, and the final profection, we see the outline of a life, a soul driven by a hidden need for glory, achieving staggering material fortune through relentless, grinding campaigns, whose monumental success contained the seeds of a sudden, transformative end in a distant land. This is how the tools converged to paint a destiny, not as a vague prediction, but as a structured narrative written in the language of the stars. A system this precise carries immense weight, a gravity the ancient practitioners felt in their very bones. This was not a parlor game, it was a sacred technology for navigating fate, and with that power came a profound ethical burden. How do you tell a client their chart shows a period of severe illness, or that their 10th house of career is ruled by a debilitated Saturn, promising hardship and delay? The relationship between astrologer and querent was a delicate dance of truth and hope, a navigation between the fixed stars and the fragile human spirit. Surviving texts like those of Vettius Valens are filled not just with calculations, but with advice on delivery. He counsels discretion, urging astrologers to soften harsh judgments, to frame challenges as tests of character, and to always highlight mitigating factors, like a benefic planet offering support. The goal was never to paralyze with fear, but to prepare. If the chart indicated a perilous journey, the advice might be to postpone, to choose a different route, or to make specific offerings to the protective deities. Knowledge of a coming difficulty was itself a form of power, a chance to brace the walls before the storm. This ethical stance walked a razor's edge. On one side lay the utility of the roadmap, the empowerment that comes from understanding the terrain ahead. On the other side lay the abyss of fatalism, the despair that could creep in if the stars were seen as an unchangeable prison. The finest Hellenistic astrologers understood this duality intimately. Their entire system, with its emphasis on the lot of spirit representing will, was built to counter pure fatalism. They were not mere messengers of doom, they were interpreters of a complex dialogue between destiny and agency. Their ethics demanded they show both the mountain on the map and the various paths to climb it, or wisely go around. Contrast this with much of modern astrological ethics, which leans heavily into a therapeutic, psychological model. The emphasis is on self-understanding, healing, and personal growth. A difficult planetary placement is framed as an inner wound to be integrated, a shadow to be brought to light. This is a compassionate and useful approach, but it often sidesteps the predictive, event-oriented core of the original art. The ancient astrologer might say, Saturn transiting your 7th house could bring a period of loneliness or a demanding partner, and here is when it will be most acute. The modern therapist astrologer might explore your innate fears of commitment and how to build healthier boundaries. Both are valuable, but they answer different questions, one external, one internal. This brings us to a pressing modern question. If this lost knowledge were in your hands, if you could see the long arcs of potential mapped out with such specificity, how would you use it? Would you seek to know the timing of your greatest challenges? Would you want to see the years of your strongest vitality, or the periods where fortune might turn against you? The responsibility is staggering. This knowledge demands a wisdom beyond calculation. It requires the humility to know that a chart is a map of potentials, not a prison sentence, and the compassion to understand that foreknowledge is a tool for preparation, not a weapon for anxiety. The true legacy of the Hellenistic astrologer may not be their techniques alone, but their sober understanding that to read the stars is to hold a mirror to the human condition, with all its destined trials and its undiminished, sparkling freedom to choose how to meet them. The precision of that ancient system stands in stark contrast to the sun sign memes that flood our social media feeds today. We live in an age where astrology is often reduced to a personality quiz, a fun but fleeting diversion. The recovered knowledge of the Hellenistic tradition offers something radically different, a deep and rigorous framework for anyone truly seeking to understand the celestial art in its full historical and practical depth. This is not about replacing your daily horoscope, but about discovering the sophisticated science that once underpinned it. For the modern seeker, this lost system provides tangible tools. It moves beyond vague descriptions of character and into the realm of observable cycles. The technique of annual profections, for instance, gives you a concrete way to understand the thematic focus of any given year. Instead of wondering why a year feels relentlessly focused on home and family, you could see that your profection has activated your 4th house. Instead of feeling adrift in a period of career confusion, you might find your 10th house is ruled by a planet currently under stress, explaining the challenge and perhaps revealing its expiration date. This knowledge transforms astrology from a passive description into an active map for navigation. You gain a language for the seasons of your own life, recognizing periods of growth, consolidation, and challenge not as random chaos, but as part of a coherent, timed narrative. This can bring a profound sense of context and patience. A difficult year is no longer a meaningless streak of bad luck. It is a specific chapter with a beginning, a middle, and a foreseeable end, governed by a celestial logic you can learn to read. For historians of science and philosophy, this recovery is nothing short of revolutionary. It corrects the record. We can now see ancient astrology not as a primitive superstition, but as a complex mathematical and philosophical system, the pinnacle of ancient efforts to find a rational order within the apparent chaos of human experience. It shows us a world view where the microcosm of the individual and the macrocosm of the universe were in constant, meaningful conversation. Studying these techniques is like finding the lost operator's manual for the ancient mind, revealing how they calculated their place in a living, interconnected cosmos. Ultimately, recovering this knowledge does more than just add historical trivia or advanced techniques to an astrologer's toolkit. It re-enchants the universe in a uniquely intellectual way. It invites us to look up at the night sky, not as a passive spectator, but as a participant in an ancient, ongoing dialogue. When you understand that the same stars observed by a scholar in Alexandria can be calculated to describe the rhythms of a life being lived today, the distance between past and present collapses. The cosmos becomes a shared text, and this lost knowledge is the grammar we are only just beginning to recover, offering a richer, more profound story about who we are and where we might be going, written in a language of light and time we are finally learning to read again. The journey from the bustling crossroads of Alexandria to the quiet intensity of a modern scholar's desk spans millennia, yet the core vision remains intact. We began with a fusion, a moment where Babylonian precision, Egyptian star lore, and Greek philosophy collided to birth a new science of the self. From that crucible emerged a celestial architecture of breathtaking complexity. The personal birth chart, oriented by the all-important ascendant, became a snapshot of a soul's potential. Planetary dignities and abilities judged the strength of cosmic officials, while the geometric conversations of aspects revealed a dynamic script of challenges and supports. The profound duality of the lots of fortune and spirit framed the eternal dialogue between circumstance and choice, and through the masterful timing of annual profections and zodiacal releasing, this system mapped not just the themes of a life, but the very seasons of its unfolding. This was not superstition. It was a sophisticated cosmic science, a mathematical and philosophical attempt to provide a detailed map of fate and fortune. In the end, what we recover is more than a set of forgotten techniques. It is a fundamental shift in perspective. The Hellenistic astrologers did not see humanity as separate from the cosmos, adrift in a silent, mechanistic void. They saw us as active participants in a meaningful, speaking universe, where the patterns of the stars above mirrored the patterns of a life below. To piece together these fragments is to reconnect with a profound strand of our intellectual heritage, one that sought answers to the great questions of destiny, purpose, and our place in the grand design. It invites us to look up with older eyes, and perhaps to find, in that ancient light, a new way of understanding our own stories. What do you think? Does this ancient view of a mapped destiny resonate with you? Or does the modern emphasis on psychology and free will feel more true? Share your thoughts on fate versus choice in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into lost knowledge, subscribe for more journeys to the edges of esoteric history.